Welcome back guys, Mick here again with another video, and in this video we're going to be talking about something other than Bethesda, something other than the Fallout games. Speaking of Fallout though, as we predicted on our previous video, nothing around the remasters or remakes has dropped as of yet. You know, personally I did try and keep my expectations low, and rightly so, because you know, when you really think about it, the community kind of went haywire over one little rumor, and it kind of just shows you how starved we are as Bethesda fans that we'll take anything and run with it. And the fact that Todd Howard, Bethesda, hasn't put out anything about production or development, you know, in response to this. I guess they don't have to, but at the same time it is kind of sad letting all these fans just kind of get, you know, disappointed, but it is what it is. As usual though, I'd like to thank everybody here in the background for commenting on the previous video, interacting with the video and letting me know their thoughts. It's good to chat to you guys, and again, I appreciate every little bit. For a small time creator like myself with a really tiny channel, you know, it is nice to see people talking in there. In today's video then, we're going to be talking about the pricing of video games and also just the cost of the gaming hobby in general. Gaming has got increasingly more expensive as time has gone on, and you know, there's all sorts of different reasons for that, but we're going to get into each and every one and kind of look at if it's justified or not, and you know, give my final opinion on the whole thing, you know, when I get everything together. But as always, thanks for clicking on this video, and let's get straight into it and find out why games have gotten more expensive. Okay guys, so if the argument is games are more expensive, we obviously have to look at what they did cost and then the relative, you know, economy shift to today. When I was a kid, I was very young, and I remember getting the new Oblivion game. Now it might have been a couple of years after release, but I do think for sure it was around £40. Now £40 is about $55. I'm not sure on the currency exchange, but for the rest of the video I'm going to use my local currency. I do apologise if it's confusing because a lot of countries use USD. Other than that though guys, £40 was Oblivion if I do remember correctly. Now Oblivion is a top tier title, it's top of the line RPG from Bethesda, and back in the day Bethesda were Bethesda, you know, this was their prime, you know, coming in early 2000s, the late 2000s where they're pumping out games. So this is a premium price for a premium product. Now I might be wrong on the price, this was, you know, 20 years ago, so who knows, but it was roughly around then. The reason I mention this now is because £40 in 2006 would be roughly about a 3x increase to today. Now while prices shift and different markets shift, and you know, wages go up and wages go down, this will change different things. Obviously there is going to be that argument that games should be worth what they're worth in currency between then and now, if that makes any sense. My argument is that's not the case, because we have to look at what games were offering then, what games are offering now, are we getting more for our buck, and what has actually changed. Because when you think about it, paying £40 for a game back then was relative to your wage. That was how much you could spend on the hobby of gaming in general, and it's roughly about the same today. Everybody has the same bills, the same outgoings, the same families, the same responsibilities. All these things still culminate to around a £40 game for a decent price. That's why games that have been releasing with 35 price tags, like Ark Raiders or Expedition 33 I believe was on the cheaper side, games like these, they're safe, they feel normal, they feel a respectable amount, and you would pay a lot more, but you don't have to, because the developers are ensuring that you pay a reasonable amount for a video game. The inspiration for this video, as you can see, is Borderlands 4. I was on my Xbox the other night and I came across the Microsoft Store. As I looked through the store, I seen Borderlands being advertised. It wasn't on a sale, it wasn't at a discount, there was no Game Pass additive. It was retailing at £70. £70 seems to be the new standard that I'm seeing pop up around video games. Again, like I mentioned, that's around $90. It is insane, and this is for the standard edition. You know, Borderlands 4 has some sort of deluxe edition which goes up to around £120, £130. I don't know what it is, some deluxe backflip I'm a real boy edition, I don't know, but it's £130. And while you may be getting DLC and content, you have to look at what you're really getting with Borderlands 4. Let's be honest, now I haven't played the game, but I don't need to. I've already heard enough reviews and know enough performance information to not play the game. And while some people may say, well, you can't make an opinion if you haven't played the game, and while I do agree with you there on some level, £70 is just too much for me to even find out. Borderlands 4 is the latest edition in UE5 failures. Randy Pitchford not only antagonising and blaming the community for his terrible game and development cycle, but also standing on business when he's released this unoptimised, unloved, low-depth bullshit title yet again. I thought Borderlands 3 was bad, but Borderlands 4 just blows it out of the park. And I understand there's people out there that are hardcore Borderlands fans. Listen, I like Borderlands 2, I like the first one, you know, those games were good, but they're just not anymore, and that's my opinion, you know, don't hate me for it.
Don't worry, nobody watches this stupid show. What's that ominous glow in the distance?
I mean, the writing is terrible, the art style's got worse somehow, the optimization is at an all-time low. I believe they might even have a quarter standard game here if the optimization was even in a half good position, but it just isn't. They just don't know what they're doing anymore. Developers aren't learning new engines, they're not creating new engines, and when they're coming out of their, education system, or they're coming out of these education cycles, they're just going on straight UE5 slop. That's all they know, that's all they're trained on. Now, well, I understand these guys are doing an impossible task. Making a video game is not easy. There's a lot of hours, there's a lot of nitpicking, there's a lot of going back and doing over mistakes. There's months and months of work, on the smallest details. But at the same time, it's crushing the video game industry. It's making us pay top tier prices for UE5 slop. Now, well, I might sound like I'm rambling a little bit. The point I'm trying to make here is we're paying £70 or $90 for a really poorly optimized game, a brand new AAA title that is impossible to run on any half decent PC without the use of frame generation or any AI upscaling. This has been a way that companies are mitigating this new optimization issue that's, it's sweeping across the whole gaming industry as a whole. We're seeing it time and time again, relying on frame gen, relying on AI, relying on fake frames, and this just isn't what we should be doing with hardware in the modern ages. I mean, benchmarking Borderlands 4 for an example, people are running this at 4K with 5080s and 5090s and still getting poor performance without the use of AI or DLSS. This is not the standard that we should be working with, and it's definitely not the standard that we should be paying premium prices for. And now, like I've said in previous videos, Unreal Engine 5 is a good tool. It can be used well. We've seen it be used well. I mean, Arc Raiders is a prime example of that. Yes, I understand some PCs may have to, rely on frame generation here and there around that game, but for the most part, when it comes to UE5 standards, it shows that it can be used correctly, and I'm sure there's other titles out there that have used it correctly. But what I'm getting at is here, Borderlands 4, £70 retail price for the standard edition, and we all know what that game entails. It speaks for itself. Now, would I buy Borderlands 4 if it was £35? Sure, why wouldn't I? I'd give it a go. I want to see if it's better than Borderlands 3. It's a new game, there's new weapons, maybe there's some funny writing, maybe it's a fun game in general. £35, why not? I'd probably try it for sure. And that's what these developers are going to miss out on, because there's people like me that might try their game but just won't do it for that £70 price tag. Now, is £35 a reasonable amount for, a AAA brand new title? Obviously not. As we spoke about earlier, Oblivion was £40 when I was a kid. But it's all about finding that happy medium between quality and price, because at the end of the day, some games can get away with a higher price point and some games can get away with a lower one. This makes the gaming industry kind of stand out on its own, because not a lot of markets can be dictated by, individual quality like this. Movie theater tickets, they don't go up in price every year, or they don't cost more because the movie costs more to make. Isolated market that the consumer does dictate a lot more than usual. Like, I'm not sure on the complete statistics, but I think Borderlands 4 lost about 50 million in sales, but they're going to make that up with their microtransactions and whatever live service thing they're offering, obviously. But it just goes to show that when the consumer doesn't think your game's worth it, they're not going to pay and you're not going to make sales. But when it comes to gamers in general, look, we're not addicts. We don't need video games. We like video games. It's a good hobby. We want to play them. But if these development companies are asking for insane amounts for video games that we can barely run on our PCs or our consoles, and just don't have enough depth and don't have the storytelling like we used to get, these guys think that because other games cost this price, their games are going to cost that price and the market's going to be, matched like it's Nintendo or something, and we'll get onto that in a minute. And here and there you'll see the argument like, you're too broke for video games, you're too broke for the hobby of gaming, you need to make money instead of games, etc, etc. That might be the case, but there's a lot more of us than them. There's a lot more people struggling to make ends meet and do enjoy gaming and don't want to be left out with this new price hike in all aspects. I know a lot of us can't even afford putting £70 on every title that comes out, and when you're a fan of gaming and you like multiple genres like myself, you are going to be picking up a lot of games, throughout the year, especially if it's your main hobby. I'm just looking elsewhere. I'm looking Game Pass, I'm looking indie games. I'm not going near some of these newer titles, and while I'm not missing out on a lot in my opinion, because a lot of these £70 titles are coming from, either poor games or poor development studios, there is a lot more that I can experience in the realm of gaming. One good thing I will say about this though, it is forcing development companies to prioritize quality over greed. What I mean by this though is we're looking at Borderlands 4 for our first example, and what Randy Pitchford and his team have done, they've put that game at £70. I don't know if any of you guys remember, but that was supposed to be £80. That was supposed to be a $100 game before everyone bullied Randy into dropping the price. Now, while we know there's so many optimization issues as shown and there's so many writing issues, £70 looks ridiculous, and then it looks really weird. You know, it makes the game look a lot worse than it is because people aren't going to pay that £70 price tag or that $90 price tag. So if you take all the issues with the game and then pair it with the insane price point that they've set this at, it makes them look even more ridiculous. And then in turn it's going to reduce sales and then force companies to make higher quality games. Because that's the issue, I think, with the gaming market as of recent. You know, games are getting lower quality. There's not a lot of thought and love put into them anymore. It's a lot of live service, free to play slop. And while this is happening quite a bit, one of the main points that the community seems to forget that they're starting to notice now is we hold the power. We are the consumer, we are the customer, and we set the price points. If we don't pay your stupid game's $70 price tag or $90 price tag, then it's on you to make a better game or a cheaper game. So we're seeing a lot of new releases such as Silent Hill F and Metal Gear Solid Snake. Those games are set at the £70 price tag. This is the top echelon of price points we're seeing in video games now. I haven't played either of these games just solely based on the price point. I would like to play MGS, and you know, I am a fan of the Silent Hill series, although this one doesn't seem to pique my interest as much. But these are at the top of the line price points. These are, you know, the tippity top that we can find in terms of Xbox Store, Xbox games. Steam's always going to be a little cheaper, and I'm not sure on PlayStation. But like I said, these games are having to decide between either joining the market, you know, meeting that top price point and joining everybody else with their greed, or prioritizing sales because they know their game isn't high enough quality to be put at that price point. You know, this is a silver lining in the whole thing. At the end of the day, we should not be paying £70 for what we're getting here. What I will say though about this initial point about video games reaching this $90 price point, this $100 price point, is that some games will be, you know, deserving of this price. Listen, do I like paying £70 for video games? Definitely not. You know, I have shown that an example. I have refused to buy some games that I wouldn't mind trying just because of the price point. But however, if we're going to go with the economy, if games are being more expensive to make, as we'll see in an article shortly, if all that is true and we are going to have to spend this amount on video games, well then the quality needs to match the price point. What I mean by this then is Resident Evil 9 Requiem, which is one of the most anticipated games of 2026, one of my most favourite titles that I'm looking forward to. This is going to be at £65 my currency, so around $85, whatever it might be in exchange. This is £5 cheaper than what we've been discussing with Borderlands 4 and such. This is the standard edition of Resident Evil 9, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because Resident Evil 9 can go with that price. I will pay that. You know, I would pay more if I'm being completely honest, but I'd rather not. But Resident Evil 9 can get away with a £65 price point because we know Capcom never miss. They're dedicated developers, they're high in their detail, they're really good with art style, they're really good with gameplay mechanics, they take their time and they put out a real high quality product because their work ethic is better and their company is better. Okay, so the reason I'm mentioning this then, guys, is because if we're going to have to pay all this money for these games, fine, okay. You guys have to start, as development companies, have to start meeting the standards that Resident Evil 9 and Capcom are making. I could talk in another video about how Japanese developers are always better than Western developers when it comes to video games. I think everybody knows that, or, you know, it's kind of a majority opinion when it comes to games. But without repeating myself too much, if we're going to have to pay these prices, they're going to have to put out a higher quality. And I think that's like a small silver lining in this whole thing, that we're going to force these developers to start locking in. And I don't want this to turn into like a Borderlands 4 focused video. I mean, this was the inspiration for the video. Once I came across that on the store, my mind was blown. But at the same time, I should also look at the other side of the argument. You know, why are games becoming this price? Well, games apparently are costing more to make, and we're going to look at a specific article regarding this. Okay guys, so in the background then is an article I found on CGM Gaming. This is kind of like a gaming news website, one of those sites that you'll see. It's not exactly IGN or these top level guys, but they cover all the main points that I want to discuss, so I thought I'd show it anyway. I'm just going to cover some of the main points on here that are attributed to why games are costing a lot more. So the first one we're going to look at here is voice acting that it talks about. As we know, voice acting has become a lot more popular in gaming recently, especially with the likes of Expedition 33 and Red Dead Redemption 2. Grand Theft Auto. We're seeing voice actors being treated like Hollywood celebrities. That's not a bad thing because these guys are really talented, they do a good job, and they make good quality art. You know, they may as well be Hollywood actors with some of the stories we see in games like Expedition 33 and Red Dead Redemption 2 as previously mentioned. While there are some like smaller voice actors that we see in video games that do amazing jobs and don't get the recognition that they deserve, this article kind of touches on how high level celebrities and, you know, high paid voice actors are being used in video games, and this isn't anything new. As we know from the Fallout series itself, we've seen famous actors like Liam Neeson and Matthew Perry be used as voice actors, and now we're seeing the likes of Charlie Cox and Stephen Ogg being used in games. And having these professional actors that can really act out a scene is amazing, because voice acting isn't just about saying the words, it's about believing the words and acting out that scene with their voice. But does that mean that these video game companies that are making these games need to go down the route of having the most famous actors in the world and having this Hollywood level production and voice acting? Well, this has worked in the past. Does this mean that we need to start adding 10 or 20 million to the budget just for these high level Hollywood actors to put on this big mad show? Well, this isn't one of the biggest factors that we can find looking at this article and just talking about it in general. Voice acting is getting more expensive and people are spending more on voice acting. Now, it's hard to get the actual figures, but it's around 15 to 20 million that was spent on voice acting in general when it comes to Death Stranding 2. Death Stranding 2 now will be in the upper echelon of that category. They did spend the most in terms of any game I've ever seen. But if companies start using these high level celebrities on the regular and start increasing their voice acting budget and try to tell these mad stories with every actor they can find, then the market will follow and other companies will start following suit, and that's going to raise the overhead, that's going to raise the cost it makes the game. And as a result, that's going to attribute to the price increase that we see in games today. Well, this isn't going to be the most major factor when it comes to the money spent by these development companies. It definitely is going to be a big enough chunk. I mean, if every game coming out wants Jennifer English in it, or they want these high-level celebrities in their game, you know, for marketing purposes. Even though Liam Neeson and Matthew Perry were definitely famous back when Fallout 3 and New Vegas were made, they definitely got more famous as time went on, you know, and I'm sure if you asked them to do voice acting, obviously, rest in peace Matthew Perry, but if you asked them guys to do voice acting now, they would charge you a lot more than what they did back then. I know for a fact Liam Neeson definitely found a lot more fame as time went on, and I'm sure if a Fallout game needed Liam Neeson, he would definitely ask for a bigger bill. The point I'm making here then is you can use celebrities for sure, but maybe go to the lower end of the spectrum, maybe some B-list, C-list guys, some up-and-coming celebrities, or even just use good old-fashioned voice actors like they used to do back in the day. You know, there's a lot of talented people out there that aren't exactly good in front of a camera or can act out, but damn are they good at voice acting, and they need work as much as any other celebrity, so there are options to, you know, reduce that cost that we're seeing. Another main reason that has been attributed to the price increases of video games is massive large-scale development teams and hires. So what this means is these AAA companies are hiring 500 plus people for engineering, 500 guys for sound, 500 guys for art, just anyone that they can find that can help with the development process. Just hiring massive multi-studio teams for long periods of time. I mean, to get a company like Rockstar that made Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto, for sure they need a lot of guys to work on them games because they have a lot to them. There's a lot of NPCs, interactions, vehicles, collisions, art, massive maps. There's just a litany of reasons why they need large-scale teams, and because of that we're going to see Grand Theft Auto be set at a very high price on release. But when we're talking about games in general and the rest of the gaming industry, and you know, more average video games than, you know, compared to Grand Theft Auto, we're seeing these high prices and we're seeing large teams being used. There is an argument to be said that this is necessary and a lot of these team members are needed for these games to be made, and they wouldn't be made on time, and I'm sure there is a little bit of truth to that. However, if we just look at Expedition 33, now I know a lot of people like to call that an indie game, but you know, there was a few studios helping out on that in terms of development, but again, the main development team consisted of 33 people, I believe. It was in at around 30 anyway, and this is a small team and they made an absolute masterclass of a title. Now this just goes to show, like, people like Ubisoft who are having to close down studios because they're using too many people. These people aren't needed. What they need is a better work ethic, they need better leadership, better planning, and also just a higher standard of developers that they're hiring. With that being said, people will make the argument that games are getting bigger and better and they look better, and that's why more people are needed to work on these larger, better games. And I would argue that, like, yes, that is the case, but if we look at something like Fallout New Vegas, do you think that's a better or worse game than Assassin's Creed Shadows? And maybe it's hard to compare the two, but if we take like a modern RPG like Avowed or Outer Worlds 2, do we think that's a better or worse game than Fallout New Vegas? Yes, they look better and maybe they have more detail to them and such, but like, at the end of the day, if a game is good, it's good. It doesn't really come down to the graphics. Fallout New Vegas Vegas was a rush title with a $4 million budget, and look what they did. You know, Expedition 33 only had 30 developers for the main development team, and look what they did. So these studios and these massive hires and thousands of people working on everything, they are being used, but are they needed? You know, sometimes probably not, and we do see that with Ubisoft studio closures and money being lost here and there. It does look like a bit of a mismanagement of, you know, funds when it comes to AAA developers. They're spending the money in all the wrong places where the gamers aren't really too bothered. You know, if you make a really good 10 out of 10 game which has mid graphics, nobody really comments on the graphics needing to be better because the game speaks for itself. Another massive thing that's popping up in the gaming industry when it comes to outgoing costs and how much money they're spending is marketing. With the rise of influencers and streamers that are constantly playing new games, talking about new games and posting new games, these guys are being hired and being paid to say certain things about up and coming development projects. Now, well, I'm not saying they're all hired to say good things or bad things, but these guys are going to have to give their opinion, and they are being paid to do so as a marketing push.
Welcome to Highguard.
AAA gaming development companies do realize that a lot of people are now watching streamers more than they are listening to IGN or PC Gamer, and they're getting their opinions from these pro gamers or high level gamers. While this can be good for the industry, there is also a lot of negatives for this, where we're relying too much on the opinions of one person or somebody who's been paid to say certain things, but we aren't really getting a good gist of what's being developed or the project that's being developed, because these guys are being paid to say what they have to say. You know, not that they're all liars or anything, but it's not good to hear an opinion from somebody that has a bit of money in their pocket from the guys they're talking about. If we are staying on the topic of AAA development companies, we're looking at the likes of Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, who have definitely spent over $1 billion in their lifetime on just marketing alone. I mean, you're looking at TV trailers, ads, anything you can get your hands on when it comes to the marketing space. These guys are paying for it, and they're paying for that space. This is going to add up the upfront costs, and because the market's becoming so saturated over time, these ads are going to cost a lot more, and these spaces are going to cost a lot more. And we're talking about Call of Duty in general. They are paying the highest of the high when it comes to ad space on TV. A big one that I did want to touch on now and talk about is this inflation, tariffs, and economic factors. Now, we're not throwing any digs or pointing any fingers at Americans or America in general, but these tariffs and the tariff situation has affected gaming as a whole. We have seen it with Nintendo, we've seen it with game prices. It's hard to not acknowledge that this is definitely a factor. We do have to discuss the Trump tariffs. Now, that's around like a 10 to 60% increase here and there. He has removed them, he has put them back on, but this is on things like consoles and chips. This was something that directly affected the inflation of the Nintendo Switch consoles, and we can definitely see it, you know, affecting RAM prices and stuff like that. While tariffs are definitely a factor that's going to affect the consumer in the country that the tariffs are coming from, it's going to affect also trade in other countries globally. But these are all costs that are going to go up, and then in turn it's going to make games cost a lot more to make, you know, with hardware for testing and hardware for creating these engines and stuff like that. All these tariffs that have been added have definitely affected prices, and you know, it's hard to ignore that in general. Other than the tariffs though, we have seen an inflation since COVID or around 2020 where prices have just skyrocketed across the globe. You know, I've been to Canada, I've been to Australia, you know, the UK, and I've just seen prices go up. I've talked to people, and across the globe basically everything's getting more expensive, trade's becoming more expensive, and then in turn that's going to affect the video game industry as a whole. A lot of these development studios and companies like to place themselves in high income and high rent areas like California, so they're paying their development engineers a lot more, and they're going to have to spend a lot more outgoing in terms of like bills and rent and stuff like that surrounding the company. So these areas are definitely going to affect how much money it's going to cost to make the game. Look, it's easy to sit here and nitpick every small reason why the video games themselves are getting pricier as time goes on. If I had to pick the biggest one that's made the biggest difference in recent times, it would be the Trump tariffs and, you know, the political situation of the world.
Can we talk about like the political and economic state of the world right now?
But like we've discussed, costs are going up, things are happening around the world, and it's affecting gamers in general. None of it's good, none of it's fun, but we're just going to have to deal with it. And as long as we can like recognize what we can control, we can really affect the prices by what we buy or what we deal with. I think we're seeing that a lot more in recent times, especially on social media and stuff. A lot of people are really criticizing games like they haven't before. A lot of people might say that that's disheartening or mean to the developers, but what I would say to you is we are the consumer, and what that means is they want our money. They want the money from our pockets. Now, if they want some of my money, then they're going to have to prove that their game is worth it. So we really do need to criticize where it's needed. That doesn't mean go mindlessly hating on developers and people making the game, but if somebody pumps out absolute garbage and asks us just to spend $70 or $90 on it, well, you gotta let them know that they're, you know, fucking stupid. Now look, while we've discussed a lot of things regarding why the prices are increasing on video games themselves, now the gaming hobby isn't just video games, it's how we play the video games and what we use to play them, and hardware is definitely affected by this price increase. Now when it comes to gaming hardware and price increases, I'm sure you all know, and I'm sure everybody's heard about the RAM increases. The RAM increases are for sure a thing and a big problem in terms of hardware affordability for gamers. However, RAM increases are not isolated in any way, shape or form. We see increases from GPUs to even consoles. We have talked about some of the reasons why this might be happening when we were referring to the video games, but there are definitely some unique elements to this. Again, when we're talking about the Great British Pound and, you know, the local currency, apologies, I think this is $650, but as you can see on screen, an Xbox Series S at a common retailer like Curry's is selling for £500. Now I remember picking up a Series X for about $450, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago, so this is an extremely high price, especially in the current climate. And you know, you have to remember that we're expecting a new Xbox releasing in 2027, so if this is the price of the Series X a year before release, let's just imagine how much that's going to cost when it does drop. Again, I don't want to just talk about PC, so I am throwing the console information in here, but before the consoles themselves, this is a similar reason to why we're seeing these price increases. I mean, there is economic factors, there is inflation, there is cost increases, but most importantly, there is those US tariffs. We're seeing tariffs put on places from imports like China and Taiwan. This is where most of the hardware is going to be made, assembled. This is where you're going to get some of the chips for certain pieces of hardware, but these US tariffs have a massive impact globally and do not just affect Americans or the import state. When we're talking about the tariffs, we're talking about specifically looking at late 2025 and coming into early 2026. Some of those main impacts that happened early on, and now we're seeing the slow rise today. This is going to be specifically talking about RAM prices. RAM prices, along with SSDs, have seen about a 200 to 300% spike in terms of some kits. For example, here's just something I found quickly. There's $105 for Corsair Vengeance RGB. That's 32 gigabytes, 6000 megahertz, and as you can see, it's $104, I think it said there, so that's about £75 my local currency. If we look at that same RAM today, guys, you know, the DDR5 6k megahertz 32 gigabyte, that's coming in at £400. This is completely ridiculous. I mean, they really are turning the hobby of gaming into some rich man's sport. You know, gaming used to be something that the common man could do together, something to unwind and escape from, you know, the hard day's work that they went through, or maybe some things going on in their life. Bottom line is, though, we're being pushed out of a hobby that everybody here has enjoyed for a long time now. All these price increases and tariffs and economic factors, they all have an impact on hardware for sure. However, the most prevalent one, and the one everybody knows about, and the biggest reason for hardware increases, is AI data centers. With the rapid and massive growth of AI usage and people using these AI, chatbots like Grok or ChatGPT, all these AI companies have to expand their data centers and then increase their component usage. Like I said, with the rise of AI and people using it, these components are at a shortage for these data centers, so they are buying up everything they can from gaming companies like Nvidia. Nvidia then being famously known for overbooking their AI order early last year or mid last year, so now they are stopping production on some of their cards, some of their popular cards, and some of their more expensive cards have seen massive price increases and are expected to increase even more. While PC gaming isn't the only method of gaming, while there is consoles out there, you will see consoles affected by this as well, because consoles do use RAM and they do use graphics processing. Now, while these components for PCs are definitely becoming more and more expensive, you can expect to see this continue because AI data centers will be expanding more, people will continue to use AI, and there's nothing we can do about it until that bubble bursts. We do not need stupid AI cat videos where they're like, backflipping and putting their hands in their pockets and stuff. We don't need AI search engines. We've used Google and regular search engines for years, but people are starting to make the switch for AI. Listen, I'm not a fan of AI by any means. I find it too agreeable and unreliable. I don't like AI art. I find it really tacky. I mean, there are some uses out there for it for sure. But when it comes down to it, there's only so many chips and there's only so many components that can be sent to these data centers before the consumer like us starts to feel the pain. And we're already feeling that pain. I mean, you've seen earlier with the Xbox prices, and then we looked at RAM and GPUs. It really is an escape mechanism. It's an escapist hobby. So when it comes down to components skyrocketing, the unreasonable prices, they're just going to alienate the consumer and alienate their customer base. And I don't see this changing anytime soon, unless there can be some sort of middle ground met where some of these components are made only for gamers and not AI data centers. I think they did something similar when the crypto mining boom happened, but until that happens or the bubble bursts, we're going to see these price increases continue. So from what we've looked at with video games and hardware and all things related, it really is showing a pattern of severe price increases across the board. While a lot of this can be attributed to the US tariffs and the economic factors in the world like inflation. Now, while of course people can still find ways to play games and enjoy games, it is just going to be another bump in the road for a lot of people. This is going to alienate a large amount of people that just can't afford it anymore. People have bills, responsibilities, they have things they just need to put money towards before they can even think about a video game. And when the prices keep increasing and games keep going up, this is just going to be a factor in them never playing video games anymore, or even just playing for a long time. And while we always expected games to slightly increase over time, I mean, when consoles came out back in the day, they were always really expensive. Back in the day when consoles would come out, the new one would cost a lot of money, and then closer to the end of its life cycle, it would reduce in price, preparing for the next console to come out. This was a cycle everybody was okay with, because you were kind of paying that extra money, to be first in line or to get it early. But, people who couldn't afford it were always going to end up getting one eventually. This isn't the case as we've seen before with the Xbox prices, still looking like the Xbox Series X just came out yesterday, and this just isn't on. This is a real bad sight to see from a gamer's perspective, and it doesn't look good for gamers in general. Listen, I hope I covered most of the important parts regarding this topic. I did look into it in depth, but most importantly, I've been experiencing the pain throughout the last 6 to 12 months, especially when buying a new computer. Although I did want to make this video just to kind of get the information out there, I kind of compile it together because it is really not great to see for gamers in general. Hope you guys enjoyed the video or got something from it, but if there's anything you want to talk about in the comments below, maybe some price increases that have affected you, or what games you think should be cheaper or more expensive, anything at all, just let me know below. I will talk to you, I will reply, I always do. But other than that, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, I thank you very much. This was a long video, this was one of my longer ones, so if you did, you are an absolute legend. In terms of the video, that is going to be it from me. I do hope you enjoyed everything I've shown so far, and if you did, don't forget to leave a wee like and a subscribe. I have seen a lot more people subscribing recently, and that is a really good feeling. I thank all you guys, and if you are returning watching the video again, I thank you especially. Other than that, boys, I'm going to bounce, so I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.